First of all, thank you for having me here, for the invitation, and to have the possibility to present one more time in the global Azure event. I know that you are a quite active community, and you have a ton of events like this. So again, one more time, thank you for the opportunity. So there are no application, no analytics, no AI without data, right? So here is why we're going to talk about the Azure databases. In this specific case, SQL Server, right? Not the same SQL Server that we've been using for a while. Now we have, like what it is, a big platform, right? SQL is not a product anymore. SQL is an ecosystem, a platform. So the name for this presentation is SQL Server Supercharged, Azure, Fabric, and Copilot in action. A little bit about myself. My name is Javier Villegas. I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm Microsoft MVP in the Data Platform Award area. I'm also Microsoft certified trainer, and I'm one of the local organizers of our community here, SQL Argentina, where we have our monthly events in Spanish. So if you feel comfortable with the Spanish, feel free to join us. At the top of the screen, you have a QR code that will connect you with my LinkedIn. And you also have on the left side of the screen all my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me in case you have any question regarding to this presentation, or if you only just want to connect. Happy to connect with all of you. All right. So Microsoft SQL from ground to cloud to Fabric, right? This is some sort of marketing phrase, but it's quite, accurate for what we're going to be talking about, right? As I said earlier, SQL Server is not that product that we download or we have the installation media. We put it in our on-premise Windows server, and probably we have it on the data center or underneath our desktop, right? Now, SQL Server is an enterprise environment. And, what is interesting about SQL, or Microsoft SQL, how Microsoft would like to call it now, is that it's not only SQL Server, the product. It also includes Azure SQL and SQL databases in Fabric, right? The most important thing is that it doesn't matter where you deploy your user databases, there are certain things that are common for all the cases. T-SQL, the language that we use to manipulate, to do query, to create tables, functions, views, or procedure, is common for all of them. The SQL Server engine, the core of the SQL Server, is exactly the same. Of course, the tooling, right? If we want to connect with Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, Management Studio, the connection string of our homemade application, well, it's exactly the same. Doesn't matter which one is, if it is SQL Server, Azure SQL, or SQL database in Fabric. Later on, we're going to describe each of them in a little bit deeper, right? Of course, integration with Microsoft Fabric that we're going to touch base in a bit, and AI, of course, and Copilot, right? Copilot, Microsoft is adding these capabilities to all the product and services, and well, Microsoft SQL is not the exception. If we try to expand a little bit more the previous slide, we can come up into this one, right? SQL Server, the latest and greatest version is 2025, which was released last year during Microsoft Ignite, right? We can still run it in our bare metal SQL Server on-premise, or using Windows Server. But since SQL Server 2017, we also have the possibility to run SQL at the top of Linux OS, the major distribution, Red Hat, SUSE, Ubuntu. At the same time, we can also run it at the top of containers within, for example, Docker or Kubernetes. That is what is the SQL Server platform, right? Then we have Azure SQL. Azure SQL has the possibility of giving us three flavors that we're going to describe later on. SQL Server running at the top of virtual machines, Azure SQL Database, and Azure SQL Managed Instance. We're going to dig deeper a little bit more. And finally, Fabric SQL Database. This is the latest and greatest addition into the Microsoft SQL family, right? Also announced last year during Microsoft Ignite. So let's start with SQL Server 2025. Another marketing phrase, which is also quite accurate, the AI-ready enterprise database from ground to cloud, right? When we mentioned ground to cloud is from the bare metal on-premise environment to Azure, right? So there are three main pillars for this new SQL Server version. AI built-in, develop modern data applications, and integration with your data with Microsoft Fabric. The AI built-in is that this time Microsoft give us for the very first time a new native data type in SQL, which is called vector, in where we are able to store embeddings, right? So in a very smart way, with SQL Server 2025, we can connect to an external large language model, like in Azure OpenAI, for example, right? Generate the embeddings of a specific text. An embedding is basically a representation of a phrase using vectors, right? But now we can physically store those vectors, those embeddings, into our user tables. And then with that, we can do different types of manipulation, like, for example, do a smart searching. What smart searching is? Well, we have the possibility of, for example, enhance the all the search that we have in SQL. Till now, the only possibilities we have are basically using the like operator within the word clause or full text search. But you have to specify your exact text that should match with what you are searching, right? With AI and these embeddings, you can start providing prompt to your application that will go through SQL and these embeddings, and you can say, for example, return or give me all the articles for your head. And if we're talking about the Adventure Wars database, that basically is a system that sells outdoor sports item, we're gonna return helmets, maybe glasses, or those kind of things. The word head or accessories for the head will probably not even show up on the description, right? This is what smart searching is. There are several really interesting use cases for this, right? But the most important one is basically when we do this smart searching. Then, develop modern data application. This specific build, there are a ton of new features for developers, and we will cover it later on in few minutes. And of course, the integration with Microsoft Fabric. We know Fabric is this data analytics end-to-end solution, right? Which has 2 years in the market, in where we can do our data-related projects from the ingestion, from the storage, the processing, and also the visualization with Power BI, right? In this specific version of SQL Server 2025, we have the possibility to do this integration with mirroring, right? Which basically brings our operational data from SQL Server into Fabric, into one lake in near real time. We will go deep on that in a minute as well. And of course, as usual, security, right? There are more features related to security in this version, like, for example, the integration with Entra ID and also Microsoft Defender, right? And like always, mission critical engines, right? In SQL, we should be able to run mission critical application 24/7 with high availability, disaster recovery. There are also several features on this behalf, right? As mentioned before, assist by Copilot, optimized for the latest hardware. So if you have modern hardware, SQL Server 2025 is really optimized to run on it, right? We move on to the part that is related to developer features, right? As I said, there are many new features in here. And just to do it graphically and step by step, feature by feature, we're gonna describe like the rectangle in dots in the screen is our SQL Server, right? So we're gonna describe all the features for developers. First of all, right, Data API Builder, which is an external tool that connects to SQL Server and basically generates a REST endpoint, right? So we can, for example, configure the Data API Builder to point to one store procedure or one table, and we can have an external application reaching out into this endpoint and retrieving the data through the REST API. This is great to do data integration, right? Before, we have to probably create a link server or an SSIS package or something like that. We go to the next feature, and first time we have native JSON data type in SQL Server 2025, right? Before, we were able to manipulate JSON, right, and store it into a car or embark car data type. Now we have JSON data types and indexes as well to improve the query, right? And also there are several updated T-SQL functions to manipulate to handle JSON. Also in the T-SQL space, there are several new additions or an improvement in the regular expression order, right? So regex, new things in SQL Server 2025. And then two new additional features. One of them is change event streaming. This is similar to change data capture to keep track of the deltas, the changes that we do to our operational data, right? Insert, updates, delete, right? But instead of sending this data, these deltas, into a different table on a different schema like CDC does, right? We change event streaming, SQL ship or stream these changes into Azure Event Hub as events. So then we can have multiple consumers connected to the Azure Event Hub and take those events. And finally, REST API integration, which allows from SQL Server to connect to any external REST endpoint. Same as Data API Builder, so external application can connect to our SQL servers. Now, from within T-SQL, we can connect to external REST API endpoint. Right? This is super cool. This is one of the possibilities that we have also to connect to, for example, Azure OpenAI using REST API and generate these embeddings. Finally, GitHub Copilot in SQL, right? And for the very first time, a native Microsoft Python driver for SQL Server. If we go to mission critical, right, we have three main areas: improve concurrency, accelerate performance, and increase high availability and disaster recovery. In the concurrency, one of the features is optimized locking. This is a new way that Microsoft handled the concurrency by doing this optimized locking. So there are less amount of locks for certain type of workload. So in this case, right, we reduce the amount of logs, and with that, with additional concurrency, we have more performance because we have more users working at the same time. In the accelerate of performance area, we have improvement in intelligent query processing, IQP, right? That SQL Server will basically give us the possibility to have better performance with our existing workload without any code change. In the high availability and disaster recovery area, right, there are more tools and more diagnostics ways to handle the availability groups. So now we jump a little bit into Azure SQL. And Azure SQL, we have these two main buckets: infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, right? In infrastructure as a service, these are virtual machines with SQL Server already installed. So we go to the Azure portal, to the marketplace, and we choose the combination of OS, SQL Server version, and edition, and we will have this created in just a few minutes. One of the benefits is that we have some of the best practices that the SQL community has created, and even Microsoft for installing SQL already applied to this virtual machine. As the name saying, infrastructure as a service, we have to take care of the infrastructure behind the scenes. So the OS, the patching, the backups, etc., etc. Then there is another bucket, which is called platform as a service. And within that, we have Azure SQL Managed Instance and Azure SQL Database. This is SQL Server as a service, right? So we don't handle, we have to, we have no idea what is the infrastructure behind the thing. We don't have to worry about the OS. We just only connect to the SQL endpoint, and we deploy our user databases, and we work with that. And then we have these two flavors, Azure SQL DB and Azure SQL MI, right? One, Azure SQL DB is targeted to modern applications, while Managed Instance is more targeting to be the SQL Server, same or almost 100% compatible with the one that we know on-premise, right? So multiple benefit on that: business continuity, high availability, backups, long-term backup retention, and shared replication. These are basically part of the best practices that we have to do, right? And it's super simple in Azure SQL. And the most important benefit to me is scale. We are able to easily scale up and down if we need to, give more power, more CPU, more memory, more faster disk, right? For forever or for a specific period of time. If, for example, our application is running and we need additional horsepower because we are on a peak season like Thanksgiving, Christmas, right? We can scale up, give more CPU, more horsepower, and then when the season is over, we can scale down. This is great because measure or come up with the proper hardware configuration for SQL, and then make sure that we can predict the workload for X amount of years ahead, right? It's quite complex. So if we have this possibility of scaling up and down, definitely this is a good thing, right? Then we also have SQL database in Fabric, right? As I said earlier, Fabric, this end-to-end platform to create any kind of data analytics project, right? We can create now Fabric SQL databases within Fabric with three main objectives. First of all, be simple, then autonomous and secure, and optimize for AI. Simple is because the only thing we need to do when we going to create one of these databases is just provide the name, period, right? In all the other flavors of Microsoft SQL, we have to specify, the service tier, the amount of cores, if it is business critical, if it is general purpose, the amount of vCore, the type of disk, the IOPS, etc., etc. Here, we just need to specify the database name, and we have our user database created within Fabric, so it can be used for any data-related project. Autonomous and secure, well, is trying to go in the direction that it does not require a database administrator to go there and handle it and manage it. So that is why it's trying to be autonomous. And in terms of security, right, the most important thing here is that Microsoft, for the very first time, has removed the support for SQL authentication, right? So only Microsoft Entra ID authentication is available. And then everything that I said before for SQL 2025 in terms of AI applies for Fabric SQL database, right? Here are some of the latest and greatest announcements on this area, right? Integration with Microsoft Fabric, right? With Microsoft, with SQL Server, we have mirroring for SQL, right? So any flavor of SQL Server, call it Azure SQL DB, Managed Instance, SQL Server 2017, SQL Server 2025, or Fabric SQL Database, right? We can synchronize or mirror the operational data into one lake in near real time, right? So if we have our application running in, for example, Azure SQL DB, we have tables, and then this application is, mission critical, and we have to create new products or new, employees, etc. Every time that we create a new, we do an insert, update, delete, this data will synchronize into Fabric, into one lake in near real time, so it can be used, right, to do analytics in near real time. Super, super cool, right? And we also have the SSMS 22, which is the latest and greatest release, right? We have in Management Studio support for 2025, support for Fabric, GitHub Copilot that we will see in action in a minute. If we talk about Copilot, right, we have the possibility of, interact with SQL Server using Copilot, right? There are two main skills with Copilot. One targeted to administrators, in where we can chat with our SQL Server or any of the Microsoft SQL components and ask questions related to database administration. For example, when was the last backup? Which SQL Server version am I running? Do I have deadlocks? Why my SQL Server is slow? Do I need to perform update the statistic this time? Do I need to do index defragmentation? Any kind of question that one DBA may, you can interact with this Copilot, asking all the things that database administrators do, right? Also for developers. For developers, it's also interesting because you can ask Copilot to analyze and explain a specific store procedure, right, that is already created. So if you want to learn more, if it is, for example, following the best practices, those kind of things, you can ask this to Copilot. Additionally, you can, if you are brand new into a company, you have your database and your manager tells you, okay, analyze and start, doing the reverse engineering or this database. You can start asking Copilot, right? If you know that, for example, this is a sales related database, you can ask questions like, for example, which are the sales for or which is the product that is in the top line of the selling process, and which is the comparison with the previous quarter, for example, right? And all this using natural language, right? So this is one example within the Azure portal. You can ask, my database is slow, and SQL Server will basically analyze and will detect that there is a query that is using a lot of CPU, and then you can ask a follow-up question saying, how can I tune the high CPU query? And in this case, is proposing to create a missing index. I know that we have few minutes, right? But I would like to show you Copilot in action, right? So I have here my Management Studio 22. I have here all my databases, right? I have here Adventure Works, and I will generate a new query. It's important to mention that Copilot will use your security context, right? It's not going to use additional rights because it's just Copilot. No, if you have only read-only rights to 2-3 tables, the answer that Copilot will provide you is based on those 2 tables that you have right? So here I'm connected to the Adventure Works database. So here at the top, I have GitHub Copilot activated, so I will hit on it, right? and I have here my chat window. I can ask, for example, which SQL Server version am I running? And after a few seconds, I mean, it's important to mention that it's a little bit slow to me. I guess that is gonna be faster at some point, hopefully, but not yet. And then, once we get this answer, I have here a big list of questions that we can ask, that we can start asking this question, like, for example, calculate the average vacation hours by shop title, right? We have no idea how many tables, the table names, the columns, the foreign keys, the relationship, nothing at all, right? But, we can start asking this, and Copilot will generate the T-SQL queries for us. While we wait for this, I'm not sure if there are any questions in the chat.
There's no questions from the chat. But from myself, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm really exciting to see now customers can create a SQL database within Azure Fabric.
Mhm.
As an Azure info person, we always do governance like our back control. I just wonder, with this feature, what kind of permissions control is there? Like, will DBA be able to create a different database, which will influence the cost, and also the other uh, connection? Is it secure? That will be question come into my mind when I get to know this feature.
So to resume, you want to see the cost, and if a DBA is needed to work, I mean, is needed to maintain one of these, right, or anything else.
Yeah, just maybe one of these. And also, I think here is a really good example to show DBA can have a good usage for GitHub Copilot as well.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, as
So in
we,
Fabric SQL database is so simple, and as I said, you don't have to specify the amount of cores or CPU or memory or anything like that, right? But it's not, I would say, super ready for mission critical workload, right? You cannot put in Fabric SQL DB your line of business application, right? It's targeted to, let's say, application that will be, for example, metadata driven application, right? Uh, that is why it's that simple. That is why you don't need a DBA to, let's say, monitor this constantly. There are certain tools that will allow it to run it any kind of workload, again, not too heavy, right? And you will be able, I mean, you will have several panels that you have in Fabric, and you can see the activities, your queries, which are the queries that are running. I mean, you may have, or a user may have a tool, right, to identify what the SQL Server is doing. And the idea is not to require a dedicated DBA team for that. In terms of the cost, it will use a chunk of your capacity, right? There is a rule of the amount of your capacity that it will use. It will use 2 point something percent of your total capacity, depending which Fabric capacity you have, right? But again, it's targeted just to applications that, for example, you need to save the state of one specific product or something, but not to do a heavy OLTP application, right?
yeah,
So if
yeah,
I go back for a minute to the query, right, to the demo, right? Here say calculate the average vacation hours
mhm.
by shop title, and here what SQL Server has done with Copilot is create the T-SQL code. So I can apply it here, I can accept it, right? And finally, I run my query, and here I have the answer for my question. The average vacation hours per shop title, right?
Yeah,
You know, At no point I didn't expand the database. As I said before, I don't know that there is an employee table, a human resource schema, right? I have no idea, right? So I can, chat with no problem. Year-on-year sales analysis. I can just provide this prompt, and super quickly and easily, right? It will give me this code that we can reuse and get all the answers. So I can spend the whole afternoon just chatting with my data and getting insight. And then, for example, I can use this code to generate store procedure views, etc. Right? So here I have another one, and I can, as I said, I can continue the whole day asking questions to my database. So I think that we are up with the time.
Yes.
So I make it super fast. It's a ton of information, I know. Again, if you have any question, feel free to ask now or contact me directly. I'm happy to answer them later.
Okay, thank you so much, Javier. And I think it is a really good session and to show us some new features in the SQL field. And for any questions, feel free to reach out to Javier by using all different methods listed in the slides. And thank you so much for your session. We will hand over to the next speaker soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.